Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to answer which company is the better stock to buy, GM stock or Ford stock. I'm going to use 5 different metrics to evaluate, starting with the price change so far. You see GM stock is up 23.7% already, Ford is up 15.95%, so they're already having a good year in just a little over 1 month. The next metric I wanted to look at is revenue growth year over year. And you see, if when we go back from 2014 all the way up to 2020, these companies were relatively flat in terms of revenue growth. They weren't growing their top line at a healthy pace at all. And then you look at what happened after the pandemic. There was an initial fall off, and then the revenue growth is absolutely soaring since then. 16.78% for Ford and 28% for GM, as supply chain constraints have allowed car companies to really increase their average selling prices. Some dealerships are asking for $10,000 above MSRP. And since there are supply chain shortages and consumers have fewer cars to choose from, car companies like Ford and GM have been able to shift production to their higher priced models. Instead of producing a mix of models, including the lower priced ones, they've said, you know what, let's cut out the lower priced models and let's just produce a lot more of the higher price, higher profit margin models instead. And that's been driving up sales and profit growth for these two companies. However, I will say that's not sustainable in the long run. Eventually, these supply chain constraints are going to ease, and the car industry is going to reach a more balanced equilibrium. Next, I wanted to look at cash flow from operations, and for GM, we see relatively flat cash flow from operations if we go from July 2020. I guess a slight increase going up to 5.6 billion from there. But if we look at Ford, they're trending downward almost since peaking at over 10 billion after the July quarter of 2020, down to 1.178 billion in its most recent quarter in cash flow from operations. The next metric I wanted to look at is operating profit margin for the trailing 12 months. And looking back before 2019, this metric has improved for GM, going from a little over 4%, I would say, to up to 6.58%. Again, benefiting from the trends I highlighted earlier, with higher priced models selling at higher margins, few discounts and incentives needing to be offered to get these cars out of their inventories. Ford, a bit of a different story. Operating margins peaked at over 12% trailing 12 months, then crashed all the way down to 3%, and it's been rising and recovering up to 8% in its trailing 12 months, compared to 6.58% for GM. Of course, these two companies only aspire to get to the level of, let's say, a Tesla, who's got operating profit margins around 16%. So the potential is there if they can get their execution in line, their efficiencies and scale, shifting production to more profitable models. But in terms of just comparing these two, Ford has the advantage in operating profit margin. Finally, I wanted to look at valuation, and looking at the forward price to earnings ratio. GM is trading at a 6.926 price to earnings. Meanwhile, Ford is trading at a 8.521 price to earnings. It's a little bit more expensive, and I feel that has to do with its better operating margins. However, I will say that Ford is having more execution problems coming out of the pandemic than GM is having. And so if I had to pick one of these two stocks to buy right now, I would say GM is the better stock to buy. They've got a cheaper valuation and fewer problems in terms of execution compared to Ford. And so if I had the choice, I would go with GM as the better stock to buy. All right, thank you for watching. As always, I appreciate your viewership, and I will see you next time. I want to thank the Motley Fool for sponsoring this video. Visit fool.com/parkev for the 10 best stocks to buy now.